Elena Volkov had been the best marksman in her unit for 3 years running. At 26, she possessed steady hands that never trembled and eyes that could spot movement from over a mile away. Her rifle was an extension of herself, and her custom scope had been crafted specifically for her unique shooting style. The other soldiers respected her skill, even if some resented taking orders from someone they considered too young for her rank. The military base in Eastern Europe buzzed with tension that autumn morning. Intelligence reports suggested enemy forces were planning an assault within days. Elena stood on the shooting range, methodically cleaning her weapon while mentally preparing for what lay ahead. She had never missed a critical shot, and her reputation preceded her wherever she went. Major Viktor Kozlov arrived at the base that same morning with a convoy of senior officers. He was a man in his 40s with steel-gray eyes and a permanent scowl etched into his weathered face. Kozlov had earned his rank through political connections rather than battlefield excellence, though few dared say this openly. He carried himself with the arrogance of someone who believed rank automatically commanded respect. When Kozlov first saw Elena on the range, hitting target after target with mechanical precision, he felt a surge of irritation. Here was a young woman outperforming soldiers who had served twice as long. Her confidence bothered him, especially the way other soldiers gathered to watch her shoot. In his mind, such displays undermined traditional military hierarchy. Elena noticed the new major watching her but continued her practice routine. She had dealt with skeptical superior officers before, and learned that consistent performance spoke louder than words. Her final shot of the session struck dead center of a target positioned 800 meters away. The small crowd of onlooking soldiers erupted in appreciative murmurs. Kozlov approached with deliberate steps, his polished boots clicking against the concrete. Elena lowered her rifle and stood at attention, offering a crisp salute. The major's eyes lingered on her weapon, particularly the sophisticated scope mounted on top. It was clearly expensive equipment, far superior to standard military issue. "Impressive shooting, Sergeant Volkov," Kozlov said, though his tone carried no warmth. "That's quite a scope you have there. Custom work, I assume?" Elena confirmed that it was, explaining briefly how she had saved for months to afford the precision optics. The scope represented countless hours of extra duty and personal sacrifice. Without warning, Kozlov extended his hand. "I'll need to inspect that scope for regulation compliance. Hand it over." Elena hesitated, knowing full well that her equipment met all military standards. She had the documentation to prove it, but arguing with a superior officer in front of other soldiers would be career suicide. Reluctantly, Elena began removing the scope from her rifle. Her movements were careful and precise, as always. The scope was more than just equipment to her. It was the tool that made her exceptional. Without it, she would be reduced to using standard-issue optics that lacked the clarity and precision she had grown accustomed to. Kozlov took the scope and examined it with exaggerated thoroughness, turning it over in his hands like a jeweler appraising a diamond. "This will need extensive testing," he announced loudly enough for nearby soldiers to hear. "I'll hold on to it until we can verify its compliance with current regulations." The other soldiers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Everyone knew Elena's equipment was perfectly legal, and many suspected the major's real motivation. Elena's jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure. She had worked too hard to reach her current position to throw it away over a single confrontation, no matter how unfair. "Sir, I have all the required documentation for that scope," Elena said carefully. "It's been approved by 3 different commanding officers over the past 2 years. Kozlov waved dismissively, tucking the scope into his jacket pocket. "Regulations change, Sergeant. I'm sure you understand." As Kozlov walked away with her scope, Elena felt a cold anger building in her chest. She recognized the move for what it was, an attempt to humble her, to remind her of her place in the military hierarchy. The major had essentially crippled her effectiveness as a marksman, at least temporarily. The other soldiers gradually dispersed, some offering sympathetic looks while others seemed relieved that they weren't the targets of the major's attention. Elena remained on the range, staring at her rifle with its empty mounting brackets where her scope had been moments before. That evening, Elena sat in her quarters reviewing her options. She could file a formal complaint, but that would likely take weeks to resolve and could make her situation worse if Kozlov had allies in the command structure. She could accept the situation and hope the major would eventually return her scope, but that felt like surrendering without a fight. As she contemplated her next move, Elena's roommate burst in with urgent news. "The enemy offensive has been moved up," she announced breathlessly. "We're being deployed tomorrow morning. Every marksman is needed for defensive positions." Elena's heart sank as she realized she would be going into battle without the equipment that made her exceptional. The irony wasn't lost on her. Just when her skills were needed most, she had been deliberately handicapped by someone who should have been supporting her mission. Elena spent the rest of the evening cleaning and preparing her rifle, knowing that tomorrow would test not just her marksmanship, but her ability to overcome adversity. Dawn broke gray and cold over the military compound as soldiers prepared for deployment. Elena had barely slept, her mind racing with strategies for compensating for her missing scope. She had requisitioned a standard-issue optical sight, but it felt foreign and inadequate compared to her custom equipment. The difference in clarity and precision would force her to adjust every calculation she had perfected over years of practice. In the armory, Elena encountered Major Kozlov inspecting weapons alongside other officers. He seemed particularly interested in sniper rifles, handling them with the confidence of someone who believed rank qualified him as an expert on all military matters. When he spotted Elena, a thin smile crossed his lips. "Ready for action, Sergeant?" Kozlov asked, his tone mockingly cheerful. "I trust you've adapted to your new equipment?" Elena nodded stiffly, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her frustration. She had spent the early morning hours on the range, frantically recalibrating her shooting technique for the inferior optics. The convoy departed at 700 hours, heading toward mountainous terrain, where intelligence suggested enemy forces were establishing positions. Elena rode in silence, mentally reviewing ballistics calculations and wind compensation formulas. Her fellow soldiers seemed nervous, aware that they were heading into a potentially deadly situation. Their destination was a strategic valley that controlled access to 3 major supply routes. Losing control of this area would force friendly forces to take much longer, more dangerous paths to reach forward positions. Elena's unit was tasked with establishing overwatch positions on the surrounding ridgelines, providing cover for infantry units moving through the valley floor. As they approached the deployment zone, Elena could see why this location was so valuable. The valley stretched for several miles, flanked by steep hills that offered commanding views of anyone moving below. However, those same hills could conceal enemy snipers waiting to pick off her comrades. It would be a deadly game of cat and mouse. Elena's assigned position was on the eastern ridge, approximately 1,000 meters from the valley floor. The climb took 40 minutes, carrying full gear including her rifle, ammunition, and survival equipment. She established her hide among a cluster of rocks that provided both concealment and a clear field of fire across the entire valley. Through her borrowed scope, Elena began methodically scanning potential enemy positions. The standard optics made everything appear slightly fuzzy at maximum range, forcing her to strain her eyes and rely more heavily on instinct than precision. She spotted movement in 3 separate locations, but couldn't determine if they were friendly, scouts, or enemy forces. Radio chatter crackled through her earpiece as other units reported their positions and status. Elena's spotter, a young soldier named Davies, settled beside her with binoculars and range-finding equipment. Together they began mapping potential targets and calculating distances to key points throughout the valley. "Contact, contact." The urgent voice over the radio belonged to a patrol leader on the valley floor. "Multiple enemy snipers on the western ridge. We have casualties." Elena immediately swung her rifle toward the reported position, searching for muzzle flashes or movement that would reveal enemy locations. The battle erupted with shocking suddenness. Enemy forces had apparently been lying in wait, allowing the first patrol to enter the valley before opening fire from concealed positions. Elena could see friendly soldiers scrambling for cover behind rocks and abandoned vehicles scattered across the valley floor. Through her inadequate scope, Elena spotted a muzzle flash from approximately 800 meters away. She quickly calculated wind speed and bullet drop, compensating as best she could for the limitations of her equipment. Her first shot missed, striking rock several inches from her intended target. The enemy sniper immediately shifted position, disappearing behind a boulder. Frustration built as Elena struggled with shots that should have been routine. Her borrowed scope lacked the precise range markings and crystal-clear optics she was accustomed to. Every calculation required guesswork that could mean the difference between saving a comrade's life and watching helplessly as enemies picked off her unit. Davies called out additional targets, his voice tight with stress as friendly casualties mounted. Elena engaged multiple enemy positions, but her effectiveness was severely compromised. She managed to suppress several enemy snipers, forcing them to relocate, but couldn't achieve the precise eliminations that her reputation was built on. The firefight continued for 2 hours, with both sides trading shots across the valley. Elena's unit gradually gained the upper hand through superior numbers and coordination, but the cost was higher than it should have been. Several soldiers lay wounded in positions where Elena might have been able to neutralize threats before they could inflict casualties. As the immediate threat subsided, Elena felt a burning anger toward Major Kozlov. His petty power play had directly contributed to friendly casualties. Soldiers who should have been protected by her precise shooting had been wounded or killed because she couldn't perform at her usual level. The weight of that responsibility settled heavily on her shoulders. During a brief lull in fighting, Elena made a decision that would define the rest of her military career. She would not accept this situation passively. If Kozlov wanted to play games with equipment and regulations, she would show him exactly what those games cost in terms of mission effectiveness and soldier safety. Radio reports indicated more enemy forces approaching from the north, suggesting the initial contact had been merely a probing attack. Elena realized she would soon face an even greater test of her abilities, still handicapped by inadequate equipment. But something had changed in her mindset during the morning's fighting. Instead of focusing on her limitations, Elena began thinking creatively about solutions. She studied her borrowed scope more carefully, identifying its unique characteristics and quirks. If she couldn't have her preferred equipment, she would master whatever tools were available. Her determination hardened like steel under pressure. The afternoon would bring new challenges, but Elena was no longer the frustrated soldier who had lost her scope the day before. She was becoming something more dangerous, a marksman with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the valley as Elena worked to understand every nuance of her borrowed scope. She had spent the brief lull between engagements studying how light refracted through the cheaper lenses, noting how the crosshairs appeared at different ranges, and memorizing the unique characteristics that separated this optic from her confiscated equipment. Davies observed her methodical approach with growing respect. Most snipers would be complaining about the gear, he commented quietly. Elena didn't respond immediately, too focused on making minute adjustments to her rifle's position. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a cold determination that hadn't been there that morning. "Complaining doesn't save lives," she said simply. "Major Kozlov thinks taking my scope will make me less effective. I'm going to prove him wrong." Davies recognized the shift in Elena's demeanor and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. The frustrated soldier from the morning had been replaced by something more focused and dangerous. Radio chatter indicated enemy reinforcements were approaching from multiple directions. Intelligence suggested they were facing a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm the defensive positions through sheer numbers. Elena's overwatch position would be critical in the coming battle, as her rifle could reach targets that other weapons couldn't engage effectively. As the second wave of enemy forces moved into the valley, Elena forced herself to slow down and think differently about each shot. Instead of relying on the muscle memory developed with her custom scope, she began treating each engagement as a puzzle to be solved with the tools at hand. Her first target appeared at 900 meters, partially concealed behind a fallen tree. Elena studied the target through her borrowed optics, noting how the inferior lens clarity affected her ability to distinguish details. She compensated by using the surrounding terrain features to estimate range more precisely than the scope's basic markings allowed. When she fired, the bullet struck exactly where she intended, dropping the enemy sniper before he could engage friendly forces. The successful shot seemed to unlock something in Elena's mind. She began adapting her shooting technique in real time, developing new methods to overcome her equipment's limitations. Instead of fighting against the scope's shortcomings, she started incorporating them into her calculations. Her shooting rhythm slowed but became more deliberate and accurate. Over the next hour, Elena engaged 12 different targets across the valley. Her hit rate improved with each shot as she learned to work with, rather than against, her borrowed equipment. Davies called out ranges and wind conditions while Elena translated that information through her improvised shooting system. Major Kozlov's voice crackled over the radio, demanding status reports from all sniper positions. Elena could hear the stress in his voice as friendly forces reported higher than expected enemy resistance. When her position's turn came to report, Davies keyed the microphone with barely concealed satisfaction. Overwatch 2 reports 11 confirmed eliminations. 0 friendly casualties in our sector, Davies announced. Elena continued scanning for targets while listening to the stunned silence that followed their report. Other sniper positions reported significantly lower success rates, despite having access to their preferred equipment. The radio silence stretched for several seconds before Kozlov responded with obvious disbelief. Overwatch 2, confirm your count. 11 confirmed kills? Davies looked at Elena, who nodded grimly while lining up another shot. Confirmed, sir. 12 now, Davies replied as Elena's latest target dropped. Elena could practically feel Kozlov's confusion through the radio waves. She had just delivered her most effective combat performance while using equipment he had assumed would cripple her effectiveness. The realization that his punishment had backfired was undoubtedly dawning on the Major. As enemy pressure intensified, Elena found herself entering an almost meditative state. Each shot became an exercise in pure concentration, stripped of the comfort and familiarity she had previously relied upon. She was forced to engage with the fundamental principles of marksmanship in a way that her expensive scope had never required. The borrowed optics taught her things about shooting that years with superior equipment had obscured. She learned to read atmospheric conditions more carefully, to judge distances using multiple reference points, and to compensate for equipment limitations through improved technique. In a strange way, Kozlov's sabotage was making her a better marksman. Enemy forces began targeting Elena's position specifically after she eliminated several of their key personnel. Bullets struck the rocks around her hide, sending stone fragments flying. But Elena remained calm, methodically engaging threats while Davies called out new targets and provided cover with his rifle. The intensity of enemy fire forced Elena to relocate twice, each time carrying her rifle and equipment to a new position while under direct fire. During these movements, she began to appreciate the lighter weight of the borrowed scope compared to her confiscated equipment. Every piece of gear had advantages and disadvantages, she realized. By late afternoon, Elena had single-handedly disrupted the enemy's planned advance through her sector of the valley. Her precise shooting had eliminated key personnel and forced remaining enemy forces to seek cover rather than advancing on friendly positions. The tactical situation was stabilizing, largely due to her adapted performance. As the sun began to set, Elena reflected on the day's events while continuing her Overwatch duties. Major Kozlov had intended to humble her by confiscating her scope, but he had inadvertently pushed her to discover capabilities she hadn't known she possessed. She was no longer dependent on expensive equipment. To perform her mission effectively, the radio crackled with new orders as friendly forces prepared for a nighttime operation to clear remaining enemy positions. Elena would be expected to provide overwatch throughout the night, using night vision equipment that would present yet another adaptation challenge. But she was no longer intimidated by unfamiliar gear. Davies noticed the change in Elena's attitude as they prepared for the night mission. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" he asked quietly. Elena considered the question while checking her rifle's zero with the borrowed scope. "I'm learning," she replied finally. "And tomorrow I'm going to have a conversation with Major Kozlov about the difference between rank and competence." Night fell across the valley like a heavy curtain, transforming the battlefield into a maze of shadows and uncertain shapes. Elena attached a night vision scope to her rifle, yet another piece of unfamiliar equipment that required immediate adaptation. The green-tinted world revealed through night optics distorted depth, perception, and made range estimation even more challenging than daylight. Shooting with borrowed gear. The night mission involved supporting a reconnaissance patrol tasked with identifying remaining enemy positions. Elena's job was to provide overwatch while friendly forces moved through areas where enemy snipers might still be concealed. The responsibility felt heavier in darkness, where a mistake could easily result in friendly casualties. Through her night vision scope, Elena watched the patrol move cautiously across the valley floor. The soldiers appeared as ghostly green figures against the darker background of rocks and vegetation. Every shadow could conceal a threat, and Elena found herself scanning constantly between the patrol's position and likely enemy hiding spots. The radio remained silent except for occasional position updates from the patrol leader. Elena had become accustomed to the weight and balance of her rifle with the borrowed dayscope, but the night vision equipment changed everything again. She spent precious minutes adjusting her shooting position and grip to accommodate the different optical setup. Davies monitored communications while Elena focused on target acquisition. The night scope amplified ambient light but created a strange, flat perspective that made judging distances extremely difficult. Elena realized she would need to rely even more heavily on terrain features and Davies' range-finding assistance. 2 hours into the night mission, the patrol reported movement on the western ridge where several enemy snipers had been eliminated during the day. Elena immediately focused her attention on that area, searching for the heat signatures that would show up clearly through night vision optics. Human body heat appeared as bright spots against the cooler background of rocks and vegetation. Elena spotted 3 distinct heat signatures moving among the rocks approximately 700 meters away. The figures were clearly trying to establish new sniper positions overlooking the patrol route. She studied their movement patterns through the unfamiliar night scope, calculating firing solutions while compensating for the optical distortions. Her first night shot presented multiple challenges beyond just the equipment. Sound traveled differently in the cool night air, and muzzle flash would temporarily blind her night vision scope. Elena would essentially be shooting blind after pulling the trigger, unable to observe the bullet's impact or adjust for follow-up shots. Elena selected her target carefully, choosing the enemy sniper who posed the greatest threat to the patrol below. She controlled her breathing and squeezed the trigger with the same steady pressure she had practiced thousands of times. The rifle's report echoed across the valley, and Elena's night vision scope whited out momentarily from the muzzle flash. When her vision cleared, Elena could see that her target had dropped. The other 2 enemy snipers immediately began relocating, moving quickly between cover positions. Elena tracked them through her scope, waiting for clear shots while the patrol continued their mission below. The second target presented himself when he paused to set up his rifle on a rocky outcrop. Elena estimated the range at nearly 800 meters, at the extreme limit of effective shooting with unfamiliar night optics. She adjusted for the increased distance and fired again, watching the target collapse. Davies whispered urgent warnings as the remaining enemy sniper began searching for Elena's position. Muzzle flashes had revealed her general location, and return fire began striking the rocks around their hide. Elena remained calm, using the incoming shots to triangulate the enemy's position. The final enemy sniper made the mistake of firing repeatedly at Elena's position, revealing himself through sustained muzzle flashes. Elena waited patiently between his shots, then engaged when he paused to reload. Her third shot of the night found its mark, eliminating the threat to the patrol. Major Kozlov's voice came over the radio with barely contained surprise. "Overwatch 2, confirm your night engagement report." Davies responded with professional satisfaction. 3 enemy snipers eliminated. Friendly patrol proceeding safely through Sector 7. The radio silence that followed spoke volumes about Kozlov's growing realization that his attempt to sabotage Elena had completely backfired. Instead of reducing her effectiveness, the confiscated scope had forced her to develop skills that made her even more dangerous than before. As the night progressed, Elena continued adapting to the night vision equipment. She discovered techniques for minimizing muzzle flash interference and learned to read the distorted depth perception created by the optics. Each challenge overcame made her more versatile and confident in her abilities. The patrol completed their reconnaissance mission without casualties, thanks largely to Elena's Overwatch protection. As they prepared to return to base, Elena reflected on how much she had learned in just 24 hours. Kozlov's punishment had inadvertently provided her with training that no amount of practice with familiar equipment could have delivered. Davies packed their gear, while Elena performed final security sweeps of their sector. "I've worked with a lot of snipers," Davies commented quietly. "Never seen anyone adapt to new equipment like you did today. That major really screwed up when he took your scope." Elena nodded thoughtfully while disassembling her rifle. Tomorrow would bring a reckoning with Major Kozlov, but not the kind he was expecting. Instead of a chastened soldier begging for her equipment back, he would face someone who had transcended dependence on any particular tool. The convoy back to base departed before dawn, carrying soldiers exhausted from the day-long engagement. Elena rode in contemplative silence, planning her approach to the inevitable confrontation with Kozlov. She had proven her point through performance rather than argument, but the major needed to understand the consequences of his actions. As the base came into view through the morning mist, Elena felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with mission success. She had discovered capabilities within herself that she hadn't known existed. The confiscated scope had become irrelevant compared to the skills she had, developed in its absence. Major Kozlov would soon learn that taking her equipment had not diminished her effectiveness, but had instead created something far more dangerous, a sniper who could excel with any equipment under any conditions. The morning briefing room buzzed with activity as officers analyzed the previous day's engagement results. Elena entered quietly and took her usual seat near the back, her rifle case positioned beside her chair. She had spent the early morning hours cleaning and maintaining her weapon, reflecting on the extraordinary 24 hours that had transformed her understanding of marksmanship. Major Kozlov stood at the front of the room, reviewing casualty reports and tactical assessments with obvious displeasure. The enemy assault had been repelled, but friendly casualties were higher than anticipated. Several sniper positions had underperformed, failing to provide adequate cover for advancing infantry units. When Kozlov reached Elena's sector report, his expression shifted noticeably. The numbers told a story that contradicted his expectations entirely. Overwatch 2 had recorded the highest elimination count while suffering 0 casualties in their assigned sector. The patrol they had protected had completed their mission without incident. "Sergeant Volkov," Kozlov called out, his voice tight with suppressed frustration. "Your reported performance seems inconsistent with your equipment limitations. I want a detailed explanation of your engagement procedures." Elena stood at attention, maintaining perfect military bearing despite the challenge in the major's tone. Elena provided a precise, professional account of her adaptations to the borrowed equipment. She described her modified shooting techniques, range estimation methods, and the systematic approach she had developed to overcome optical limitations. Her report was factual and detailed, delivered without emotion or complaint. The other officers in the room listened with growing interest as Elena explained how equipment limitations had forced her to rely more heavily on fundamental marksmanship principles. Several experienced shooters nodded approvingly as she described techniques they recognized as advanced field adaptations. Kozlov's expression grew darker as Elena's report continued. It was becoming clear to everyone present that his confiscation of her scope had not achieved its intended purpose. Instead of humbling a young sergeant, he had inadvertently created a demonstration of superior skill and adaptability. "That's quite remarkable." "Sergeant," interrupted Colonel Morrison, the base commander who had been observing the briefing quietly. "You achieved these results with standard-issue optics?" Elena confirmed that she had, adding that the experience had taught her valuable lessons about equipment independence. Colonel Morrison's interest was clearly piqued. He had been reviewing performance reports from all sniper positions and was undoubtedly noting the contrast between Elena's exceptional results and the mediocre performance of other marksmen using preferred equipment. The implications for training and doctrine were significant. Major Kozlov attempted to regain control of the situation by shifting focus to other aspects of the mission, but the damage was already done. Word would spread quickly through the military hierarchy about the sergeant who had excelled despite equipment sabotage. His attempt to diminish Elena had backfired spectacularly. After the briefing, Elena remained in her seat as other officers filed out of the room. She could feel Kozlov's angry stare, but maintained her composed demeanor. When only the two of them remained, the major approached with barely controlled fury evident in his posture. "You think you're very clever, don't you, Sergeant?" Kozlov hissed, leaning close enough that Elena could smell the coffee on his breath. "This little demonstration of yours won't change anything. I still have your precious scope, and I can make your military career very difficult." Elena met his gaze steadily, her voice calm and professional when she finally responded. "Sir, I respectfully request the return of my personal equipment. It has been more than 24 hours since you confiscated it for alleged regulation compliance review. and no deficiencies have been identified. Kozlov's jaw tightened at Elena's formal approach. He had expected pleading or anger, not the cool professionalism she was displaying. "Your equipment is still under review," he replied sharply. "The process takes as long as it takes." Elena nodded thoughtfully, then reached into her uniform pocket and withdrew a folded document. "Sir, I've prepared a formal equipment requisition request to replace my confiscated scope. Since the review process timeline is uncertain, I need to maintain operational readiness with appropriate equipment." The requisition form was perfectly completed and properly formatted according to military regulations. Elena had listed her confiscated scope as temporarily unavailable due to compliance review and requested immediate replacement with identical equipment. The form required Kozlov's signature as her immediate superior. Kozlov stared at the document with growing realization of his predicament. Signing the requisition would officially acknowledge that Elena's original scope was being held without cause, since replacement with identical equipment would be illogical if compliance issues existed. Refusing to sign would appear petty and potentially raise questions from higher command. Furthermore, "Sir," Elena continued in the same professional tone, "I've documented my performance improvements using standard issue equipment and prepared a training proposal for other marksmen." Colonel Morrison expressed interest in reviewing innovative training methods. Elena placed a second document on the table between them. The training proposal detailed her adaptation techniques and suggested incorporating equipment-independent marksmanship training into the standard curriculum. It was thoroughly researched and professionally presented, clearly the work of someone who understood both shooting fundamentals and military training doctrine. Kozlov realized that Elena had outmaneuvered him completely. Her exceptional performance with borrowed equipment had not only nullified his punishment, but had positioned her as an innovator and problem solver. The training proposal would likely receive favorable review from senior officers, further enhancing her reputation. The major's face reddened as he grasped the full scope of his miscalculation. His attempt to humble Elena had instead provided her with an opportunity to demonstrate capabilities that exceeded her peers. She had turned his sabotage into a career-enhancing achievement. Elena maintained her respectful demeanor while watching Kozlov process his defeat. She had learned valuable lessons about resilience and adaptation, but also about the importance of responding to unfair treatment through excellence rather than complaint. The experience had made her stronger and more versatile. "I'll consider your request," Kozlov finally muttered, unable to meet Elena's steady gaze. Elena saluted crisply and gathered her documents. "Thank you, sir. I'll continue using standard equipment until my scope is available." She turned and walked toward the door with measured steps. As Elena reached the doorway, she paused and looked back at Kozlov, who remained standing behind the table with slumped shoulders. "Sir, for what it's worth, yesterday taught me that good marksmanship isn't about having the best equipment. It's about adapting to whatever tools are available and never giving up." 2 hours later, Elena was on the training range working with 3 junior marksmen when Davies approached with barely contained excitement. "You need to see this," he said quietly, gesturing toward the base headquarters building. Through the windows of the administration office, Elena could see Major Kozlov in heated discussion with Colonel Morrison. Elena continued coaching the young soldiers while keeping one eye on the developing situation in the headquarters building. Her training proposal had clearly reached Colonel Morrison faster than anticipated, and the base commander was apparently taking a personal interest in the innovative techniques Elena had developed. The junior marksman Elena was training had requested her assistance. After word spread about her exceptional performance with standard equipment, they wanted to learn the adaptation techniques that had allowed her to excel despite equipment limitations. Elena found teaching these methods helped reinforce her own understanding of the fundamental principles. "The key is not fighting against your equipment's limitations," Elena explained to Private Chen, who was struggling with a borrowed scope, similar to the one she had used in combat. "Instead, incorporate those limitations into your shooting system. Use them as reference points rather than obstacles." Chen nodded thoughtfully and applied Elena's guidance to his next shot. The bullet struck much closer to center than his previous attempts. The other soldiers gathered around, eager to learn techniques that could make them more versatile and effective marksmen regardless of available equipment. As the training session continued, Elena noticed Major Kozlov emerging from the headquarters building with a distinctly defeated expression. Colonel Morrison followed him outside, their body language suggesting a conversation that had not gone well for the major. Elena maintained focus on her students while observing the interaction peripherally. 20 minutes later, Davies returned with an update that brought a slight smile to Elena's lips. "Colonel Morrison wants to see you in his office at 1400 hours, Davies reported. "Word is that your training proposal has generated significant interest at division level. They're considering implementing your methods across multiple units." Elena felt a surge of satisfaction that had nothing to do with personal vindication. Her techniques could potentially help other marksmen become more effective and adaptable, ultimately saving lives in combat situations. The professional recognition was gratifying, but the potential impact on soldier effectiveness was more important. At precisely 1400 hours, Elena reported to Colonel Morrison's office. The colonel was reviewing her training proposal when she entered, and his expression suggested genuine interest in her innovations. "Sergeant Volkov, this is impressive work. Your adaptation techniques address real tactical needs that our current training doesn't cover adequately, Colonel." Morrison explained that division headquarters had been concerned about marksman performance degradation when soldiers were forced to use unfamiliar or backup equipment. Elena's documented success with borrowed gear had attracted attention from training command, who were always seeking proven methods to improve soldier effectiveness. "I want you to develop a comprehensive training program based on your experience," Morrison continued. "You'll work directly with our training cadre to incorporate equipment-independent marksmanship into the standard curriculum. This could become doctrine for multiple divisions." Elena accepted the assignment with professional enthusiasm, while internally marveling at how dramatically the situation had evolved. Major Kozlov's attempt to sabotage her had inadvertently launched her into a training development role that could influence marksmanship instruction across the entire military. As Elena prepared to leave Morrison's office, the colonel mentioned almost casually, "Oh, and Major Kozlov will be returning your confiscated equipment this afternoon." The compliance review found no violations, as expected. His tone suggested he was well aware of the real motivation behind the confiscation. Elena returned to the training range to find Major Kozlov waiting with her custom scope in his hands. His posture radiated defeat and barely suppressed anger as he handed over the equipment without speaking. Several other soldiers witnessed the return, and Elena could see the satisfaction in their expressions. "Thank you for the thorough review, sir," Elena said professionally as she accepted her scope. The experience of using alternative equipment proved quite educational. Kozlov's jaw tightened at the diplomatic way she